So welcome, it is lovely to see you. So if you could introduce yourself and say what A-levels you did at Hereford Sixth Form College.
Hi, I'm Harriet and I did English literature, philosophy and ethics and medieval history, and I finished last year, and then this year I'm on a gap year before going to Oxford to study Japanese at St Anne's College.
Brilliant. So that's fantastic. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is that you had a unique experience last year, but that's going to be everyone's experience this year of having online interviews. So could you tell us a little bit about what preparation you did for the interview and then how the interview went? Tell us a little bit about that. So you had your interview in this room, I think, didn't you?
So I had one interview in this room, which was my college interview. And I had a faculty interview when I was away from my hotel room. And the interview process, I wasn't sure what to expect because I knew it would have to be similar to what other people would be having on the premises. But obviously it would be a bit different because I'm doing it via Teams. So to prepare, I made sure that I had my personal statement and I'd read over it and I knew exactly what it had on it. I know lots of people said that their interviews didn't focus on the personal statement, but I found that my interviews, like especially for the college one, they used it to ask questions and that's where the discussion came from. And for the other interview, I made sure that I knew like deeper things about the subject because I'm going to go and study Japanese. A lot of the work I've done at college isn't subject specific, so I made sure I had like a deeper knowledge of the subject.
Fantastic. And so what's really good is that you were actually not doing that subject at A-level. And so how did you prepare? So there are a lot of students who, for example, might be applying to law, who might not be doing law. What kind of things would you suggest about approaching an interview where the subject is slightly different from the ones that you're studying?
I know when I did my interviews, I'd done an EPQ, which was to do with like history in Japan, and also it had like areas to do with like literature and feminism. And so what I made sure was that parts of the courses that I was doing I could compare them. So when I was talking about history and like the feudal ties in Japan, I could relate that to my history course when we were doing Tudor monarchs. And when I was speaking about the literature I'd read, the Japanese books, I could compare that with my A-level course texts. So I compared Frankenstein with the books I was reading, which meant that I had something I felt comfortable about speaking and something which was a bit more different, but that they knew about. So I could talk about it and jump across different texts and make sure that I was like linking my ideas so they knew what I was talking about. So I found that much easier having something comfortable and having something to do with the subject, and you can compare them and say where the differences are and talk about perhaps why the differences are that way.
Lovely. And then tell us practically, so what happened? Talk us through you walking into, let's say, this room. So the reason why you were doing an online interview was because at that point you were competing, weren't you? So tell us a little bit just briefly about why was it you were doing them online?
At the time I was competing for Wales and karate, and I had a competition in Venice when my interviews were scheduled, which meant that I couldn't go to the interviews or I couldn't go to Venice, which wasn't really the option at the time.
Yeah.
So I spoke to the colleges and they said that I could have the online interview version via Teams. So the first one was scheduled the day before I flew out in college, and I made sure I had plenty of time to sort of relax but not that I was sitting around to get too stressed, and then set up the video link. I found it quite relaxing that you're not there. Like you do have like a barrier between you and the interviewer. But it is like any normal interview experience that I've had, in the way that they still talk at you and you still have to reply and make like a strong dialogue between them. And also they can still see who you are. They can still like experience who you are through the camera. It's not like they don't meet you, because they do meet you.
And so people think that to go to an interview for these top universities, you have to be incredibly confident in your opinion. You have to be an amazing public speaker. Do you think that's the case?
I don't necessarily think that's the case, because when I had my interviews, I wasn't very confident. I was quite nervous because I didn't know what to expect. But they were very good at making you feel relaxed and making it feel like just a conversation with a teacher. And it was just like discussing stuff that you're interested in, which I mean, isn't really a problem. And also when I was going wrong, when I was saying things which weren't necessarily true, this is what I had for my faculty interview. Because they were what I believed, there was no problem with it. They just said, well, I think this, even if you think that. And we just discussed like why different people have different interpretations of like what we experience, because we were talking about religion in Japan and religion around the world, and how in some religions they don't cross over with others. And I said one thing and they disagreed, but it didn't matter because we had a discussion about why I believed it and why they knew it to be the other way, which is really useful to have them telling you where you're going. Good. And also it's quite nice to, especially if you're doing a subject that's different to your college subjects, you'll discuss stuff which you can't discuss to that level with people because they're like the lead in that. So you can ask questions if you're interested in knowing stuff, which in itself is a really good experience for wherever you end up going. To have that experience of talking to them about your subject is great.
Fantastic. Was there anything particularly challenged? So it sounds like it was quite a nice conversation. Anything you found particularly challenging?
I know when my interview from the one that was in Venice, the whole setting it up on my own was very stressful because I didn't leave enough time to get to the hotel and there was a whole stress about that. So when I came in, I'd been sat in a sports hall for about 9 hours and I was stressed about like having an interview and the connection wasn't very good. So just making sure that you like eliminate any things which will make you more stressed. So if you know that you want to have it all set up and you want to give yourself time to read or anything, I think that's important because just making yourself as calm as possible is the most important thing.
Brilliant. And then in the sessions, did they give you any information to look at or was it just a dialogue?
In my first session, because I hadn't finished writing my EPQ at that point, I asked for advice on like different areas in my EPQ. So I said what I had written and I asked them like where they thought would be good to go with it, which was really useful because they gave me some sources and some things to read.
Brilliant.
They were very relaxed with me leading the conversation. So in my first interview, I essentially spoke about what I wanted to speak about, and then they added like what they wanted to know. And then in my second interview, it was much more structured. They chose the questions and it was very like question answer. So I think it differs how many interviews you have and how it's structured. So I know like the first one, they gave me advice, and the second one, I just answered the like structured questions that they asked.
Oh, good. And so then after the interviews, how did you feel they had gone?
After the first one, it was really nice because I could just go back into the library and be like, oh, that's done now. So it was like nice and easy and it went fine. After the second one, I was really stressed because I had to go like quickly like close it and finish it and get back to the stadium. So I was more stressed after the second one because it was less relaxed. It was more structured, and I'd made some like inaccurate comments about what I'd learned. So I was worried that they would pick up on that, although they definitely did, but just didn't mind.
So and they're okay with you making mistakes as well. They know you're kind of 17, 18.
Yeah. When I made the mistakes as well, they made sure that I knew I'd made a mistake, but they didn't press too hard on it, except from like in cases where they wanted a discussion about a certain thing. So
and then the other thing is when you did get things wrong, I think this is the other thing that they want to see. They want to see you talking through your ideas. They also want you to acknowledge when you make a mistake and not necessarily hold to that. Would you agree with that? That they want you to be flexible in the way you learn rather than kind of dogmatic in your stance?
Yeah, definitely. Because if you allow yourself to admit that you've made an error or a mistake, and then they gave me the chance to talk through why I'd made that mistake and why I thought that. And then they helped me like come to a different conclusion about why that's a mistake and what the answer actually is. And they helped me discover that answer. They didn't just tell me straight, they let me work it out, but with them helping me, which was nice.
And I think at the time that feels quite high pressure. I think you sometimes get those kind of discussion based ones, and then sometimes you're led through a series of questions that feels quite like they're pushing you through quite a few questions, and that can feel, as you said, quite high pressure. But I think the nice thing is from the students we've had, they tend to give you a balance. One is one style and the other one's the other style, where you're taken through a set of questions.
Yeah.
Good. So what hints and tips would you give to people who are going through the process this year? So online interviews, what hints and tips would you give?
Make sure you know your personal statement, because I know for me, that's what they based a lot of my discussion around, because it's something like evidence that you've written. Make sure that if you've written anything on your personal statement that you've actually read it and you know it well, and you can make academic conversation about it, not just generalized. Don't be stressed, because that just doesn't help. Make sure that you've given yourself plenty of time to prepare. Also, I wouldn't prepare, this is the opposite of that, I wouldn't prepare too much, because you don't know what they're going to ask you. So make sure you just know your subjects well. And if you're going to study a subject which isn't what you're doing at the moment and you haven't done a lot of work for it, make sure you can explain where you want to go with it and what you have done and how that relates.
Yeah, that's a really good idea as well. That actually, if it's slightly different to the subjects you're studying, how what you have done relates to what you're interested in. I think it's also really useful to think of it as a conversation with someone who's really a brilliant person, a really academic person in their subject. And actually, this is a really exciting opportunity to talk to them. I think it's also really helpful seeing that you can talk through your ideas, but you're not kind of supremely confident and you don't have all of the answers. And I think that's really helpful as well. So thank you so much, Harriet. That was brilliant.